I am not a rich man, by no stretch of the imagination, but I owe absolutely no one, no mortgage, no loans, no credit cards. Actually, wait, I owe my best friend $200, but that's a whole other story. We can still debate that. Point is that I'm a man that live well within my means so that I can live without any stress of debt. Now, some people will argue, oh, you got to know how to use debt. You know, there are millions of books, etc., that are written on this subject. The majority of the Western Hemisphere, people live in debt. That is it. Student loan debt, mortgage, car payments, etc. My car, 9 years, 8 years old, 9 years old, runs well, change the engine oil, change the spark plugs, I maintain it well, and it does the job. Gets me from A to B. Can I buy a new car? Yep. Can buy a new car cash. Does it make sense to me to buy a new car? The answer is no. And so, my friends, welcome to this new episode on money. I want to talk to you guys about money. This, I think, is one of the biggest problems that most people have in society. It is the number one reason divorces occur. It's the number one reason men attract women. It is the number one reason people go to jail. They want to steal it or try to acquire it illegally. So today I want to listen to this brilliant guy.
Don't do it. Run for your life.
Mr. Morgan Housel.
He's the author of
The Psychology of Money,
one of the best-selling business books of this decade.
He can help anyone build wealth and change their life.
The world is split between people who don't know how to start making money and people who don't know when to stop making money. And if you are stuck in a low-income job, you feel like you don't have the opportunity to generate wealth. But once you realize that opportunities are available for everybody, you can choose where you want to live, what job you want, when you retire, because you can be rich.
Prove it.
People like Ronald Reed, and he was a janitor.
What does it take to amass Mr. Reed's $8 million fortune?
He's a fascinating story of somebody who became rich despite not having the skills that you normally associated with wealthy people. Then there's Warren Buffett, who's worth $100 billion. But the real secret to their success, investing.
I've read his book, and I would strongly encourage you guys to go and buy this book, The Psychology of Money. But also, I want you guys to go and listen to this podcast. It's 2 hours long, but I can assure you this will be the best lesson you will ever get on money because it's brilliant. I have lived by a few principles that are applied in this book way back when I was younger, and we're going to get into that. But let me introduce you to this podcast. This podcast is called Diary of a CEO. Now, I've done a review of one show on this podcast before. This gentleman has some amazing guests that comes on to his show. So I would like to highlight this one again. Go over, listen to this podcast, guys. I can tell you, it will probably change your life. So let's get into it.
What I would consider to be the greatest book on money and finance ever written. I say that because I remember when I came into money, when I was 27, 28 years old, and my brother turned to me and said, there's one thing I ask of you. He said, you have to read this book called The Psychology of Money. It will stop you losing all of the money you've just earned from your career. And it changed my life. I've talked about it for years and years ever since. And that's why I was so keen to have this conversation with you, because I really believe if people choose to listen to this conversation, it stands the chance of changing theirs too. So let's begin. Why? Of all the things that you could do with your life, Morgan, why are you writing books about the subject matter that you explore? What is the reason?
Well, first, that's a big statement. That's a lot to live up to. It's kind of scary to hear that because I've often been, and this gets to the why. When I've just find it as selfish writing, where I write for an audience of one, and that is me. And I like to think of myself as a pretty selfless person, but for writing, I don't try to say, I'm going to write a book for this person or that audience. I write what I'm interested in, and I write it in a way that I think is interesting. And I try to solve my own problems.
That's sort of like what this channel is about, right? I mean, I talk about what's interesting to me, what I find fascinating about the world, where I see the problems with the world. and how I can contribute back some of the knowledge that I've gained over my lifetime of existence. I have the ability to speak. Most people don't. That's why part of my major business is to help people understand how to relate their message, get their message out online. But there's one thing that's clear. If I am trying to give you guys information that you don't like or don't get the views, I don't really feel bad because, hey, it's something that I want to do, something I want to teach you, something I feel good about. And when I speak to you, I want to speak to you in a language that is me, authentic. I'm not going to try to be anybody else different just to please you. No. Let him continue. Let's get into it.
What is the benefit to my life if I understand the things that are written in The Psychology of Money?
Well, let me start with, I think most finance books will, their answer to that question would be, when you're done with this book, you will know how to pick stocks better. You will know how to balance your checking account or what credit cards that you should use. For my book, I think when you're done with it, I hope that you will just look in the mirror and say, who am I? Which is kind of what I did with this, trying to figure out who I am and what I want and why I was insecure, why I wanted to show off to other people the car that I drove. So if you become more introspective about who you are and what you want out of life and what money can do for you and cannot do for you, and become a little bit more introspective about why you think about where you are in the social hierarchy and greed and fear and why you think about these things that you do. I honestly think that, I hope at least, because it was this way for me, that when you're done with the book, that's kind of when the learning begins. Because maybe this will just spark a bit of curiosity for you to then go for a walk and think about what you want out of life and whatnot. So I think most books, when you're done with the last page, the learning is done. This, I hope, is just spark something in you that will get you to think more clearly about what you want with money and what money can and cannot do for you.
And this is so true. Because most books that I've read over my years in my lifetime will tell you, hey, this is how you do this. This is how you do that. Not tell you this is how you should think about this or that. This book here lets you focus on how you should think about money. Because money is a tool, right? It's not a thing. You don't just acquire money and let it sit. Just like you would not just buy a hammer and let it sit in the shed. If the hammer isn't being used to build things, then it has no use. The same thing is money isn't moving. If it isn't working, it has absolutely no use to you. But there is a psychological aspect to that. The fact that the money is sitting there gives you a sense of security. The hammer can do the same thing. You know that, hey, if something breaks in my house or if I need to repair something, the hammer is there. It gives me a sense of security that I can find the hammer. But I don't want to get too far into it. Let's listen to this gentleman some more.
And what money can and cannot do for you.
Part of that journey of understanding what you want helps you to define the word on the front of this book, wealth. What is your definition of wealth?
Well, I made up these definitions in the book. So these are just my things that I made up. But I defined rich as you have enough money to buy what you want, to pay for your mortgage, to make your car payment, to go out to dinner with your friends. You have money in the bank. Wealth, I think, is very different. Wealth is money that you did not spend, and maybe you will not spend. So wealth is hidden. It's the money that you didn't spend on a car. It's the money that you didn't spend on a big house. You didn't spend on jewelry. And that's really important because wealth that's saved up, the unspent money, is what gives you independence and autonomy and just the ability to wake up every morning and do whatever you want with your life. And so I think separating that is really important because when most people say, I want to be a millionaire, what they actually mean is, I want to spend $1 million. That's what they mean. And when I think about being a millionaire, I think it's you have $1 million that you're not going to spend. And that because you're not going to spend it, you have this giant cushion that will give you independence and autonomy. And so you can wake up tomorrow and say, I can do whatever the hell I want today. I can work for who I want. I can work for as long as I want. I can retire when I want. The world is yours.
Yes. This guy is so zoned in to the psyche of people and how they look at money. Yeah, when people say, I want $1 million, they're not saying I want the physical $1 million. They want to spend the $1 million. So they want all the trappings that you can acquire with the $1 million. This is where our society goes sideways. People are being conditioned to just buy shit, just crap. Luxury items is the worst thing to actually buy, because a Louis Vuitton bag that costs $5,000 versus the bag from Adidas that costs $100 does the same function. They carry stuff. But the $4,900 difference isn't in the material. It is in the label, the brand. That has no function to you. Listen to what I said. No function to you. You just spent your money and threw it at an imaginary thing called a brand. But you all are so conditioned to think that that has value. It doesn't, my friends. It is not a store of value. Try to resell one of these bags that you just bought and see how much money you lose.
It's an autonomy. And so you can wake up tomorrow and say, I can do whatever the hell I want today. I can work for who I want. I can work for as long as I want. I can retire when I want. The world is yours. Like every bit of savings that you have is a piece of your future that you own. You're just buying your time in the future so that it's yours and you can do whatever you want with it. And that to me has always been the goal. There's a quote from Charlie Munger where he says, I never wanted to become rich. I just wanted to become independent. And that when the first time I read it, it was like, that's me too. That's what I want. I don't want a Lamborghini. I don't want a mansion and a yacht. I want to wake up every morning and just say, whatever I want to do today, it's mine. Nobody's going to tell me where to work, when to work.
I was driving my daughter to school this morning and I had her listening to this guy, to this same video. That's what prompted me to actually bring it to you guys. Because part of what he's saying is that people who look at money in the proper way, let's go back to the $1 million example. I want $1 million. The difference between the average person wanting $1 million and I wanting $1 million and what I'll do with it, I'm going to put that $1 million, the entire $1 million, in a money market fund. And I'm just going to live off the interest. I'm just going to live off of some of the dividends. And I'm going to live well below my means. Whereas the average person will go and spend the majority of it on luxury items, junk, cars, and so on. Everything that will depreciate and also suck more money from them because you got to pay the insurance, you got to pay the taxes, you got to pay the maintenance and all of these other stupid things that you buy. So eventually, that $1 million will disappear. So they are living well above their means, whereas I'm still happy. So what we're looking at is, what does the $1 million on one hand buys you in luxury items versus what it will buy me, peace of mind, contentment, and a future where I say I can do whatever the hell I want. I don't need to work. Eventually, this person here is going to have to work because they're going to spend it. I'm not interested in spending the $1 million. I'm interested in investing it. That investment gives me complete and total control over my life. That's what he's saying. There's a difference between being rich and being wealthy. And another part about being wealthy is that you can transfer it to your kids and create a legacy. If you watch my video from yesterday, you will understand what I'm talking about when I talk about legacy. Legacy is passing on something to your kids so that they will have an upper hand. They will have a hands up, a foot on the next rung of the ladder with all the other people that they're growing up with. That is legacy. I want to create a legacy. That would give me happiness. That's what it all comes down to. Are you happy, right? Are you contented and are you happy?
Say, whatever I want to do today, it's mine. Nobody's going to tell me where to work, when to work, what to do. It's all me. And to me, for not just work, but for your family life, for your health, for your mental sanity, there's nothing more important than that.
It sounds like you're talking about your father.
My dad, he has such an interesting background. My mother too. Their background is so crazy. And I didn't realize how crazy it was until I was an adult. The early part of my childhood, when my parents were in school, we were very poor. My parents were students living off of student loans and grants. We had no money. And then my dad became a doctor when I was 12 or 13 and things changed. We were not rich, but things got very comfortable. And what was really important is that the frugality that my parents had to have when they were poor stuck with them. even after they started making a little bit of money.
They didn't buy a Lamborghini.
No. We grew up in a very modest house. It was a nice house, and we took some like decent family vacations, but we always lived well below our means, way below our means.
Did that confuse you? Because you must have known that your dad had the money.
Yes, particularly when I was probably like 16, 17, and I could learn like how much does a doctor make? You can go look it up and figure it out. And then it was like, I definitely looked down on my parents at that age because I was like, I know you can afford a better car. I know you can buy me better Christmas presents. I know we can afford a bigger house, and you're not doing it because you're mean. I think that was my view. And then it really clicked about 10 years ago. This is not that long ago. So my dad is an ER doctor, which is one of the most stressful jobs that you can imagine. It's literally people dying in your arms every day. And he did this for 20 years. And after 20 years of doing this, night shifts, children dying in your arms literally every week, he said he had had enough. It was a lot. He put in his dues. He did it for 20 years, and he said, I'm done. I'm going to retire. And the reason he could do that is because he had saved up so much money. He was living well below his means. They had a very high savings rate. The moment he woke up and said, I want to be done, he was done. And that was it. And if you contrast that with so many other people, including some of his colleagues, who were also burnt out at age 60, who were also burnt out by having people die in their arms for 20 years, they wanted to retire and they couldn't. Because they had the bigger house, because they had the nicer car that I thought that we should have had when we were growing up. And when they quit and moved on to their next phase of life, they got so much happier.
And this, my friend, is one of the major reasons the Western world is going to shit. This is why things just keep going up in price. Because everybody's just demanding more and more and more and more. I remember watching a Bloomberg study that analyzed most Americans and the size homes that they were living in. I was heavily in the real estate market back in the day, right? I did very well in the real estate market. So I had to study the market. But one thing was very apparent about, especially the American market, which actually spilled over into the Caribbean market as well, is that these oversized homes that Americans live in. And a study was conducted by, I think it was Bloomberg. Don't hold me to that, but I will try to see if I can find the study and place it up on the screen. They discovered that most American homeowners were living in homes that were 33% bigger than what they actually needed or used. So a lot of the space that they had in their homes was unused, 33%. Now, I want you guys to just think about that. People buy homes to impress their neighbors and impress their friends, not realizing that if I buy a home that is not used, that means I have a mortgage that is 33% more than I actually needed to have. I have a mortgage that I'm paying 33% longer on than I should have been. But no one thinks about that. The only thing people think about is, oh, I have a big house. Look, I can afford to pay for a big house. But they don't think of the future. When you come to the point where you want to stop working, when you have the choice, because that's all money does. Money gives you a choice. That's it. It gives you a choice whether you want to buy a Mercedes or a Toyota or a Lamborghini. Choices. And it's based on how much money you have. It gives you a choice whether you want a vacation in your country, in your backyard, in the next state, or around the other side of the world. Choice. That's what money does. But more importantly, let's go down to grassroots. It gives you the choice of whether you're going to have good health care, good insurance plan, or a bad one. And it gives you the choice of whether you want to work for the asshole boss or you want to find a job that you enjoy doing. Yeah, choices. That's what money is for, to give you choices. Not for you to spend recklessly because you have it. Not for you to go and borrow more money because you got the money. Let's continue.
And moved on to their next phase of life, they got so much happier. And so it was like, this was 10 years ago. I was in my late 20s at this point. I was like, now I get it. He was frugal, he saved a lot, and that made him independent. And the independence made him happier than any car would have done, made him happier than any big house would have done. So it's like, I think that is one of the keys to happiness. Happiness is like the most complicated topic you can imagine, but one of the big puzzle pieces is independence. And there's been a lot of work on this, studies on this, of like, one of the things that makes people really happy in life is having control over what they're doing. And it's more so the flip of side of that. It's like, what makes people very unhappy in life? Not having control over what happens in their future, not having control over their schedule, where they're going to work, whether they're going to get laid off. Having that uncertainty is a massive anchor and weight on your life.
And bad for your health.
Absolutely. I mean, that was a big thing for my dad too. He was working night shifts for 20 years with this. It's very bad for your health. It's not great at all. So the ability, the financial ability to just wake up one day and say, I'm done with that.
Freedom. Chapter 7 of your book. This is the broadest lifestyle variable that makes people happy. Doing something you love, but on a schedule you can't control, starts to feel the same as doing something you hate. Psychologists call this reactance.
That's right. You know, I do think there are a lot of, I think the best example are CEOs who might make $30 million a year, $50 million a year, but they have no control over their time. Every single second of their day is planned and demanded by somebody else. And they have to do things that they don't want to do. If they wake up and they're tired, too bad, you got to go to your meetings today. If they wake up and they're exhausted, too bad, you have to travel to China to close this deal. They have no control over their time. And compare that to someone who makes much less, but they wake up, they can wake up and do whatever they want to do. You want to hang out with your friends? You want to sleep in? You want to take a nap at 2 o'clock? Whatever you want to do.
Now, this is one of the most stressful things. Now, I haven't worked for anyone since I was 24, 25 years old. After that, I pretty much just had other businesses that I created myself. And the one thing I hated while working for the bank is the routine. I hate routine. I cannot stand the fact that I go to work every single day and do the exact same thing. Drove me insane. But I was young. I realized I had to do what I had to do. I had no choice. Okay? I had to do that and go to college at night. Point is that was where I discovered that I could not work for a company. So we have to understand money isn't always the key to happiness. It's simply a tool. Now, I had reached a point where I had made enough money to put some aside so that I didn't have to stress about the money. I don't have to worry about anything. I don't have to stress about the money. And because I had no debt, I have no mortgage. I rent. That's a whole other thing that you guys got to think about. Owning your own home isn't a big flex. It's one of the worst investments you can make, especially in today's modern society. Now, of course, land is different. That's a whole different story. But owning a home isn't always what it's chopped up to be. So, point I'm trying to make is your happiness and my happiness are based on two totally different things. I just thought I'd tell you guys my story so that you can understand a little bit about me from a financial perspective. But let's continue with this gentleman's story.
Because virtually everybody thinks if my net worth or my income was this level, I'll be fine. I'll feel great. No more problems. I'll wake up every morning with a smile on my face. And then if you're lucky enough or you work hard enough to get there, you realize it's not the case at all. You're just going to keep pushing it forever.
Have they done studies to test that in terms of analyzing whether people's goalposts move off into the future, even when they're like billionaires and whatever?
I mean, here's the broadest way that I would frame this up that has been studied. If you look at America today, the average household, adjusted for inflation, is making twice as much money than they were in the 1950s. Adjusted for inflation, the average household double the income that they were back then. And we're less happy. The statistics that try to measure happiness over time, it's not an easy thing to do, but we're less happy today than we were back then. And this is why, like, look, can money buy happiness? Yes. And to some extent, does it? Yes. Like people who are in abject poverty are not as happy as people who are covering the basics and they have food and shelter, et cetera, et cetera. But over time, when the society is getting richer and you're comparing yourself to other people, and maybe the average American's income doubled, but so did their neighbors, so did their coworkers, so did their siblings. So you just automatically adjust to that.
You say the first rule of happiness is low expectations.
Yep.
And that's exactly what you're talking about, is comparison is the thief of joy because it just raises our own expectations, right? And with that, out the window goes our happiness.
Yeah. And it seems counterintuitive to people that if you want to be happy, for most people, it's if you want to be happier, you need to be ambitious. You need more. You need to make more money, work harder, have a more successful startup, whatever it would be. And that's true, but that's half the equation. The other half of the equation is keep your expectations low. So the gap between those two, it's the gap between those two that actually accrues to happiness over time.
How did you learn that?
I think there have been a couple little stories that really stuck out to me. One that I love that just knocked me on my ass the first time I read it was Stephen Hawking, the late physicist, who was, without exaggeration, one of the smartest people to ever walk this planet. He was just an absolute genius. And a quirk, of course, is that he had a motor neuron disease and he was paralyzed from head to toe. He had no control over his body. He spoke through a computer. Not a single muscle in his body could he actually control by himself. So he was, physiologically, it's one of the worst lives that you can imagine. And he did an interview with the New York Times a couple years before he died. And during the interview, he's talking about how happy he was and how amazing his life was. And the New York Times they asked him, what is your secret to happiness? Like, if there's anyone who has the right to complain about life, it's that guy. And he's talking about how happy he was. And he said, my expectations were reduced to 0 when I was 21, which is when he got his disease. And he said, everything else since then has been a bonus. So this is like the guy whose life is has ended up in a way that most people watching that would say, like, that's among the worst scenarios you can imagine. And he's probably happier than you and I because his expectations were so low that just waking up in the morning and seeing the sunrise and getting to go to work and talk to people was this magical gift. I mean, you can imagine, not to get too morbid about this, but imagine you're on your deathbed and the doctor is very confident that you're going to die tomorrow. And then let's say that you make it one more day. What is that sunrise going to feel like? What's that, holding your wife's hand for one more day going to feel like? It'd be amazing just because your expectations were on the floor. Mm-hmm. And so it's always like that. And you go through life seeing so many people who have everything, all the money, the great family, all the health, the beauty, everything you can imagine, and they're not happy for it. And it's because with everything that they have, their expectations rise not only to that level, they might rise above it. So if your expectations rise faster than your income, you're never going to be happy with your money, no matter how much money you make. You can make $1 billion a year, but if you needed and wanted 1.1 billion, you're broke. You feel broke. And the reverse of that is true too. There are people who make $50,000 a year, but if they only need 40 to be happy, they're stoked. They feel great. And so I think that's one of the reasons it's so important, is because managing your own expectations is more in your control than managing your circumstances in terms of raising your income, raising your investing returns. It's not that you can't control raising your income. You can be ambitious and smart and entrepreneurial, of course, but it's more in your control to just inside your head to say, I'm going to try to want less. That's just a mental exercise. That's not to say it's easy. It's not easy at all, but you have total control over doing it. And once you realize that, like, the takeaway is nobody is thinking about you as much as you are. Nobody cares about your stuff as much as you do. Nobody cares about your car or your house or your clothes or your jewelry as much as you do. Because to the extent that they're even looking at them, they're looking at your car, looking at your house, really what they're doing is imagining themselves with that nice car. They're not giving you the credit. They're imagining themselves having it. So once I realized that was the game that was being played in society, once you recognize that's the game, your willingness, your desire to show off plunges.
I hope I've given you guys a good enough preview to get you interested in the psychology of money. I would highly recommend that you go and buy this gentleman's book. I have it, I've read it, and I can tell you it really blows your mind. Okay, so let's have some feedback. Tell me where you are financially, if you're comfortable, if you're working on building yourself, whatever. Let's have a discussion just so that we can build each other. But more importantly, be comfortable with money. Okay, guys, I'll see you in the next one. And remember, whenever in doubt, always ask an older man. Cheers.